Hello and welcome to Reading the Gospels Together, and today we are in John chapter 18 for the arrest and trial of Jesus. The time for speeches is over. We are now rushing forward into the events of Holy Week. And it all begins with Jesus and the disciples leaving the relative peace and security of the upper room. Now, tradition, backed up with some compelling archaeology, places the location of the building which housed the upper room on Mount Zion, on the northwest corner of the city. The church has marked this location since its earliest days. While the building there, which stands there now, is only 1,000 years old, the foundations of that building date back to New Testament times. Now, John, with typical detail, mentions that Jesus and the disciples cross the Kidron Valley and arrive at a garden. This would place them on the Mount of Olives, directly to the east of the city. Now, the text tells us that Jesus and the disciples went into it, later that Jesus went out from it, telling us that, as was the case with many such gardens, it was walled. The other Gospels refer to it as a Gethsemane or Gethsemane, the Aramaic word meaning olive press. And so we can infer that it was a garden of olive trees in which was located an olive press. There is just such a press on the Mount of Olives, located in a cave to provide shelter, which would have provided concealment for Jesus and his disciples, necessitating the involvement of Judas in revealing their location. The Christian community has held services in this cave in Holy Week since the earliest recorded days. It's long since been converted into a permanent place of worship, and it can be visited to this day. Now, John tells us that Judas, knowing of the hiding place, leads a detachment of soldiers and religious officials to the spot. John doesn't mention the prayer of Jesus at Gethsemane. Rather, he adds the detail that Jesus, expecting the arrest, exits the garden, or perhaps even the olive press cave, and meets the soldiers outside. He asks them who they want. "Jesus of Nazareth," they reply. Now a surprising moment. The New International Version reads, "I am he," Jesus said. And when Jesus said, I am he, they drew back and fell to the ground. Now, the text actually says, "I am," rather than "I am he." This is important because in Hebrew, what Jesus actually responds with is a single word, Yahweh, which is both "I am" and also the divine name by which God identifies himself to Moses. Now, to this day, Jews will not say the name Yahweh, considering it too holy to use. Instead, God is referred to as Adonai, which means my Lord, or simply as Hashem, which means the name. So when Jesus responds, "I am," the men fall back, either in shock at what they would have regarded as the ultimate blasphemy, a mere mortal giving himself the name of God, or in realization of being in the divine presence. Perhaps this is a moment, some speculate, when a brief glimpse of Jesus' divinity is revealed, resulting in the men falling back in much the same way as the guards at the tomb fell unconscious at the presence of the angel. I tend to think they're shocked at the audacity and blasphemy of the statement. In the other Gospels, Jesus responds, "I am," when questioned by the high priest, who tears his robe at the blasphemy. John places this reaction here as well. In any case, the arrest continues. Jesus appeals for the release of his companions, once again revealing his inner nature, that Jesus is never concerned for his own safety or well-being, but always more concerned for the well-being and safety of others. Now Peter jumps into the fray, attacking the servant of the high priest, cutting off his ear. John mentions the servant's name, Malchus, but doesn't include the detail that Jesus healed the man, which Luke includes. Rather than the kind of servant who cleans house or cooks meals, the name Malchus, which means counselor, may well indicate a closer relationship to the high priest, perhaps someone who's there to ensure that proper procedures are being followed. It's also possible that the fact that John mentions Malchus's name is an indication that the man was known later to the Christian community. Perhaps Malchus, despite losing and then regaining an ear, perceived that Jesus was indeed the Messiah and followed him as Lord. There's further proof of this, which we'll come to a bit later. Jesus rebukes Peter for his actions. "Put your sword away. Shall I not drink the cup the Father has given me?" Now, the Gethsemane prayers of Jesus leap immediately to mind when we hear these words, as they would have to John's readers as well, who had those other Gospels in hand. The soldiers bring Jesus to Annas, the father-in-law of the high priest Caiaphas. John reminds us that Caiaphas had pragmatically said that it would be better if Jesus died rather than bringing destruction on the whole nation by his actions. Bringing Jesus first to Annas would help insulate Caiaphas from any political fallout from this hasty arrest and trial. Now, Annas, who we're told previously served as high priest, interrogates Jesus regarding his teaching, hoping to catch him in something which would lead to his condemnation. But Jesus simply answers that if anyone wants to know what he taught, they should simply ask around. Jesus says, "I've always taught publicly, never in secret." Well, a soldier strikes Jesus in the face for this evasive answer. "Is that any way to answer the high priest?" Well, Jesus asks the soldier why he struck him if what he said was true, which of course it was. In these brief examples, John is demonstrating that Annas was not getting anywhere by questioning Jesus. This isn't going to go as easily or smoothly as the religious officials had hoped. Annas gives up, sends Jesus to Caiaphas, most likely resident in the same high priestly residential compound. The foundations and cellar areas of this compound have been uncovered, just a 7-minute walk or so from the location of the upper room. There's now a church built atop these ruins called Petrus Gallicantu, Peter of the Cockcrow, which leads us now to a sad and familiar part of the story. Peter and another disciple, we're told, had followed Jesus and the soldiers all the way to the high priest's compound. We aren't given the identity of the other disciple, nor are we told that it was an apostle, just a disciple. We know from other Gospels that more than the 12 apostles were with Jesus that night. What we're told is that this other disciple was known to the high priest, and so was able to enter the courtyard of the compound with the official delegation. He was then later able to return and speak to the servants on duty and have Peter admitted to the courtyard as well. Who was this unnamed disciple who pulls these strings? Nicodemus, perhaps? We don't know. It's one of those details which we simply won't know the answer to, and church tradition doesn't help us out with that one either. I'm going to have to leave that one hanging. Well, the girl who was instructed to allow Peter to enter asked him if he was a disciple of Jesus, and Peter simply answers, "I'm not." John adds the detail that it was cold, and Peter and the others were warming themselves by a fire. Peter's then asked by another. Again, he responds, "I'm not." While the other Gospels tell us that suspicion arises because of Peter's distinctive Galilean accent, John is silent on this point. John mentions a trickier reason for suspicion. Peter is confronted by someone who was there at the arrest. And not just there, this man is a relative of our man Malchus. The fact that this detail is recorded is further evidence that Malchus ultimately became part of the believing community, providing these details for others to follow. "Didn't I see you with him in the olive grove?" Malchus's relative asks Peter. And then again we read, again Peter denied it, and at that moment a rooster began to crow. The other Gospels tell us of Peter's reaction, running away and weeping bitterly. John simply leaves the story there. Now, when I'm in Jerusalem, I always visit the church of Petrus Gallicantu, not only because of the historical location of the historical significance of the location, but also because of a particularly beautiful view of the old city of Jerusalem from a roof of the compound. Once, while there, standing on that overlook, reflecting on the events of the night of the arrest, a rooster crowed quite close by. Well, that's one of those moments you never forget. I'm sure Peter didn't forget it either. But Jesus will help Peter through the pain of his denial later in chapter 21. There's lots for us to get through before we're there, however, and we're going to resume next time with the trial of Jesus before Pilate in John 18, part 2, verses 28 through 40. Read it carefully, and I'll see you then.